hand over to Brian, sharing on Tradition 11. Cheers, Brian.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, David. Thank you, Amy. Anybody else in service? My name is Brian, and I'm an alcoholic. And so nice to be here. We've been doing this now for 11 weeks, 12 weeks, 12 weeks, 12 weeks. One more week to go on my session. So we're going to talk about Tradition 11 this evening. And because we did Tradition 12 at the start, we'll do a wee summary of it next week. And then I guess I'll just waffle for a while and then we'll wrap it up. So next week will be fun for me, as will this week. Tradition 11 is a nice, easy one. But it's also one where we get to sort of smash a few myths, which is always fun. Thanks to those faces who I'd never seen before and still keep continuing to come to this workshop. Most of them leave after week one. Most of them did leave after week one. For those of you who stayed on, thank you. And it's very, very good to have your support and your participation. Thank you for investing in Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you for investing in the drunk who isn't born yet. Thank you for investing in the guy who hasn't met the girl who ultimately will conceive the child in the future, who becomes an alcoholic and gets to walk into a room or log on to a room that is there, running, working and efficient because we set it up that way. We'd be probably dead by then. But, they'll be thinking, were it not for those old geezers way back in 2025 doing this right, there wouldn't be a room for me to walk into. Is that fair enough? I guess the point that I like to make is we are, first of all, repairing the damage done by those who went before us, because they've made a right royal balls of the whole thing. I actually remember one time whenever I was at a service structure meeting in the first couple of years of our group, and they were just giving me a hard time, like they always did back then. And I remember saying to them, like, I don't know why you guys are giving me a hard time. I've only arrived. You guys ballsed it up. I'm just here to try and fix it. And, maybe that wasn't the most diplomatic thing to say, and it didn't really set us up to have a good, strong relationship moving forward with those people who I guess were trying their best. So don't take a leaf out of my book in that respect. But the point there, it is that we're sort of coming together here, huddling around this particular table. I'm hoping to be part of a renaissance, to be part of a movement of people who are members of Alcoholics Anonymous, who don't want to be a separate splinter group, who don't want to come up with new ideas, but who can see the value of holding on to the 12 points to secure AA's future, as they were once called, the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, as they're now called, as being the weapons in our arsenal within this battle. Why not? It's what the founding members of Alcoholics Anonymous come up with whenever they made balls of it. We're not sort of, lying in the shadow of the first set of catastrophes within AA. Like, they didn't just write the traditions because Bill wanted to sell another book. They came up with the traditions because they were making mistakes. I guess some might say that the 12 traditions are the remedy to AA's 12 biggest mistakes at that point. That's certainly how I see them. And the interesting thing, though, is that the errors that they were making and the problems that they were suffering are the same as the ones that we're suffering today, which can be described in 3 words: lack of unity. So what we're trying to achieve with the 12 traditions is to unify around a common purpose, as defined on page 17 of the big book. A bunch of guys with the same illness. I introduced myself with a bit of a stammer as being Brian the alcoholic. My friend Chris, who's the only one who's spoken at this meeting so far, also introduced himself as alcoholic. Anybody else, if they were to speak at these meetings, introduce themselves in the same way as me, because they are the same as me. We have one thing in common. If Laws, William, David, Pamela, John, Maria were to take alcohol into their system in any form, something would happen in both the mental and bodily sense that would make it virtually impossible for them to stop. If not, I don't know what you're doing here, but I presume that to be the case, because that's why we all arrived here, right? So this unify around that, but what really holds us together is that we have found a common solution, a way out on which we can absolutely agree and join in brotherly and harmonious action. So here we are, a bunch of guys unifying around the book Alcoholics Anonymous and the program of recovery within, and taking action with that. We're taking action with the book. What does that look like? I don't know. Some of you guys know that my fiance, soon to be my wife, Susie, I met in Alcoholics Anonymous. We met during lockdown at in an AA meeting in New Jersey, of all places, the same night that I met Chris Bailey, as it would happen. And we, she lived in Edinburgh at the time. I lived here just outside Belfast, and we didn't really get to see each other very much. And lockdown was happening. But one time she came over, and our mutual friend Mags phoned me up to say, she mentioned the name of a lady in the group who's in awful trouble and I need your help. And I was like, man, I'm just picking up Susie from the airport, but I'll be there as soon as I get her. And Susie get into the car, and I says, right, there's an alcoholic emergency. And she just says, right, let's go. And it was one of those emergencies that took up all of that day and most of the next day. And then after which Susie flew back to Edinburgh again. And neither of us thought that was the wrong use of that time. So what does it look like to join in brotherly harmonious action? I'm pleased to say it doesn't look like that all the time, but that's what it looks like sometimes. What it looks like to give myself to other people, to other alcoholics, to serve other alcoholics. I spent quite a lot of time serving me, and it didn't really work out very well for me. And really weird thing. And I don't really understand the spiritual stuff. I'm able to read. I can understand what the spiritual texts say, but I don't understand the results because they're baffling. And whenever I am of service to other people in the way that Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me, for some reason, all my needs seem to be met, but not in a scraping by way. They seem to be met abundantly. You guys know why that happens? I don't know. If you ever figure it out, let me know, because actually I'm not really sure I want to know. It might sort of jinx the whole thing. But if I just seem to give you 10, God, the universe, Allah, or whatever, seems to give me 100 back. I don't know why. Pretty good deal. I'm happy enough with it. I'm not complaining. So, are we all agreed that these traditions are a good idea by this stage? Everybody on board? Should we all maybe just get behind them? Good. Well, of the few of you who stuck on at this workshop, awesome. If that's what I think, that's amazing. I'm going to be me and say something that you might not like, though, but here goes. If you turn up at your next business meetings and you haven't learned traditions on your own, and some of you already knew them before you came here, of course, then you're not really a well-informed member of Alcoholics Anonymous. There you go. I'll say it again. If you turn up at your business meeting and you don't understand the traditions sufficiently and you're not learning them, whatever, then you're not a well-informed member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Then you probably shouldn't say a word. Or if you're going to say something, seek the counsel of your sponsor, who I presume will be well-informed. It's not a harsh thing to say. Who cares? It's the way it is. And this is where we need to get ourselves, right? But here I've got some good news, right? I left school without any formal education. I'm not a particularly clever fella. I might be able to speak in such a way that implies that I'm smarter than I actually am, and I've been getting away with that all my life. But I'm not smart. I do know how to read, though, and thankfully, that's one thing that I did pick up from school, is the ability to read. And our traditions are not that fucking complicated. Just read the damn things. And if you're really stuck, if you just read the long form, and then if you're wondering, is that what it actually means literally? Yes. So, maybe don't read the history books if you couldn't be arsed. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Maybe read the forward to the second edition. You'd have read that with your sponsor, and if you're sponsoring people, you'd be going through that anyway. It's pretty simple, straightforward history of AA, and then read the long form of each tradition and take it literally. And I reckon that's going to get you halfway there. The 12 Traditions Illustrated pamphlet is amazing. You guys in Britain, GB, outlawed it, removed it from the shelves because there were some images within it that were considered not particularly politically correct. I had a look at the images, and to be fair, they're not particularly politically correct. But to just remove it, why not just remove those images? Like, you can get AI to do that shit in 2 minutes. Like, but to remove a vital tool, that's like saying, the easy way of understanding the traditions will remove because nobody gives a fuck about the traditions anyway. I agree with him. In that respect, nobody does, except us. We do, and we want to learn the damn thing. So the good news is you can find it on the internet. And please don't look at those images because, to be fair, they are not necessarily useful. But, just maybe get ChatGPT to remove those bits or something. But the essence of what's in there is a very, very easy way to understand the traditions. Now, I say an easy way to understand them as if they would be complicated without that guide. They're really not. Get yourself a copy of Language of the Heart. It's a good book. It shows the Grapevine magazine articles from which Bill Wilson launched the traditions. You know what? The 12 Steps in the 12 Traditions book on the part about the traditions is not terrible. So there's enough material out there that can be read to help to understand these points, but give me a call if you want to talk them through. I would love to talk them through with you. If you're reading through them and maybe they seem more complicated and you would just want to have a chat about them, I'll certainly share my experience with them. Anything that helps somebody to turn up at your own business meeting being well informed, because you may well be the only well informed person in that room. And if you have a room of people in which the majority are not well informed, then there's no real point to any of the rest of the traditions. If you don't have a well-informed group conscience, it's all kind of fucked. So anyway, we're fixing that, right? Isn't that a good thing? So who amongst us, who within our groups needs to have access to the traditions in order to be a full member of AA? On the front of said pamphlet, the 12 Traditions Illustrated, I think I might have read this one of the other weeks, but who cares? It's great. It reads, as newcomers, many of us say to ourselves, let the group officers worry about the traditions. I'm just an average member. There are rules for running groups, aren't they? And everybody tells me there's no rules in AA. Then we look closer and find that the traditions are not rules, but they are not just for officers. They have deep meaning for each one of us, as the 12 steps do. Like the 12 steps, the traditions are not figured out in advance as courses of action against future problems. The action came first. Pioneer AA groups with nothing to go on except the trial and error and try again methods soon discovered, well, that way didn't work, but the other one did, and this one works even better. And so on and so on. The point I want to make is that the 12 traditions are for the average group member. Now, I did a workshop similar to this 4 years ago for a group in Edinburgh, and I was running around last minute, sticking my tie on, whatever, but I'd logged on, just my screen was off, and one of our group members had logged in and he was chatting with some of the members of that group, and they're asking him, well, do you know the traditions, or, so you're the same group as Brian? And he just says, no, I don't need to know the traditions because Brian does all that. Okay, well, I failed miserably. But like, there was a time, not anymore. Our group's now very, very well informed. There's many people in our group now who understand them much better than I do. But at the start, I joked at one point, and it was kind of true, that if I turn up at a business meeting talking about a tradition that I just completely made up, they would all believe me. Because, it was just a young group and we hadn't learned the traditions. Like, we're all sort of learning on the job. But it really sort of brought it home to me how dangerous that could be. If I try to do something that isn't in line with our traditions at the moment, there's at least 5 or 6 people on the phone within seconds. There's one of our group members phoned me up the day before our meeting last week and pointed out a whole load of things that I was supposed to have done and hadn't done, and reminded me of my responsibility and so on. And was like, thank God for that, because we're all there and we're all well informed and we're all holding each other accountable. Why? For that kid who hasn't been born yet. Not for Amy. Amy's okay because she's already found us. So is David. So is Tracy. So is John. Billy. Stephen. Irvin. If I've left anybody out, it's not personal. I just don't want to say everybody because I'll be here all night. But the point being, we've already got it. We're preparing for the next raft of people. In fact, we're preparing for the raft that comes in after them. I normally do a bit of a recap here, don't I? But I don't really fancy it because we want to do a big recap next week, and traditional 11 is kind of beefy, so why don't we just get stuck into it? And Chris, sure, if I finish a wee bit earlier, I'm sure there's going to be loads and loads and loads of questions, and that's my favorite part of this anyway, because it requires zero preparation. All right, so let's read the traditions at least in the tradition 11 in the short form and the long form. The short form reading: our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. The long form: our AA experience has taught us that our relations with the general public should be characterized by personal anonymity. We think AA ought to avoid sensational advertising. Our names and pictures as AA members ought not be broadcast, filmed, or publicly printed. Our public relations should be guided by the principle of attraction rather than promotion. There's never need to praise ourselves. We feel it better to let our friends recommend us. So I said earlier that if you just take that literally, it's probably going to make enough sense. And let me let you into a bit of a secret. That's all I've been doing for the last few weeks. I'm taking the long form, taking the first line, expanding on it, taking the second line, then expanding on it. That's it. It's just taking the long form literally, but they make me speak for half an hour, so I just have to put more waffle around it. But essentially, that's all I'm doing. Like, there's nothing clever happening here. It's maybe just experience with the traditions has given me the confidence to read them literally. But they're no more literal now than they were whenever I first read them. I just didn't know that that's how to read them, if that makes sense. But anyway, let's do it again with this one. The first part of that refers to public relations. So what does that mean? I think it's important that we get this right, because you see that attraction rather than promotion thing. It's one of the things that I feel that I have to say in a sarcastic voice, attraction rather than promotion, because it's just said so many times out of context, and I've just heard it in the most bizarre with the most bizarre uses. But anyway, I won't do that tonight because I'm trying to be a gentleman for once. All right, so public relations essentially is how we communicate with the outside world. So we're looking here about personal anonymity. So it's how I communicate with the outside world as a member in AA. So how does AA communicate with the outside world, and how do I communicate with the outside world? Well, it says that it's done by personal anonymity, which is an interesting term, but let's expand on it from the original article that Bill Wilson launched into the world in the Grapevine magazine article in October 1948. Now, I'm reading from Language of the Heart, this version here. That's on page 91. It's going to read the first couple of paragraphs because, well, I think it's relevant. So, Providence has been looking after the public relations of Alcoholics Anonymous. It can scarcely have been otherwise, though we are more than a dozen years old. Hardly a syllable of criticism or ridicule has ever been spoken of AA. Somehow we've been spared all the pains of medical and religious controversy, as we have good friends, both wet and dry, left and right. Like most societies, we are sometimes scandalous, but never yet in public. From all over the world, naught comes but keen sympathy and downright admiration. Our friends of the press and radio have outdone themselves. Anyone can see that we are in a fair way to be spoiled. Our reputation is already so much better than our actual character. Surely these phenomenal blessings must have deep purpose. Who doubts that this purpose wishes to let every alcoholic in the world know that AA is truly for him. Can he only want his liberation enough? Hence our message through public channels has never been seriously discoloured, nor has the searing breath of prejudice ever issued from anywhere. Good public relations are AA lifelines reaching out to the alcoholic who still does not know us. For years to come, our growth is sure to depend upon the strength and numbers of these lifelines. One serious public relations calamity could always turn thousands away from us to perish, a matter of life and death indeed. The future poses no greater problem or challenge to AA than how best to preserve a friendly and vital relation to all the world about us. Success will rest heavy upon the right principles, a wise vigilance, and the deepest personal responsibility on the part of every one of us. Nothing less will do, else our brother may again turn his face to the wall because we did not care enough. Oh, wow, wouldn't that be awful? On the part of every one of us is what it reads. This idea of remaining anonymous is something that always struck me as being odd. So I've been in business for most of my adult life, and I spend a lot of time and sometimes scandalous amounts of money ensuring that the business is positioned in such a way that people can see us and that they're aware of us. And if we do anything remotely interesting, we shout about it from the rooftops. Now, we're not in the saving of lives business. We're in a business that's incredibly dull by comparison. Alcoholics Anonymous, on the other hand, is in the saving of lives business. Now, there are quite a few celebrities who are members of Alcoholics Anonymous. We all know who they are. I'm not going to talk about them tonight. But why don't we get those guys to express their gratitude for AA by getting into the public domain and talking about the good work that we do and how we were able to pull them back from the gates of hell or insanity? Would not be a good thing. Would not be a really useful thing. Because to a marketeer like me, that makes absolute sense. And I couldn't, it took me so long to get my head around this particular tradition. And it's like I've said before, the purpose of the traditions is to protect you from me, because there's no part of this makes any sense to me, or at least it didn't. But I remember it wasn't that long ago. In fact, I think it was 7 years ago, because something happened recently that reminded me of this story. But there was a well-known A-list actor who was all over the TV having the most incredible meltdown and relapse and drugs and alcohol. And yeah, it was quite the scandal. It was also very amusing, but nonetheless, if you were an alcoholic who had recovered, it wasn't amusing because you could see the pain in this man's face. And but it wasn't that long ago he was also making it known that he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So to see this Alcoholics Anonymous success fall apart right across the whole of the news media was quite the shock. And I'm sure it wasn't helpful for the cause of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, the perception being, well, AA must have let that guy down. And now we know that not to be true, because we know that the program can't do that if it's worked. But you can understand why the perception of the outside world can be different to what we know, because why would they think otherwise? You know, so to celebrate the successes also means we have to deal with the apparent failures. It doesn't help the brand of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, the founding members realized from their own experience that kind of exposure had as much capacity to be damaging as potential to be useful. So, you know, this is the sort of thing that we avoid for that reason. That there's another guy whose podcast I still listen to, I've been listening to for years. And again, I don't want to say too much. I don't speak about individuals, but what I would say, he made his fame through sporting endeavors. Let's put it that way. But it became very clear quite earlier on, some of the things he was saying all sounded a wee bit big bookish whenever I was listening to his podcast. And he sort of has guests on within the health and well-being space that drifts into spirituality. And then, you know, anyway, he announced then on one of these things that he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and here's a great bunch of lads, and I've been there for years, and it's all going well. And it was just this blatant violation of Tradition 11. So whenever we're looking at what does a violation of Tradition 11 look like, it looks like that. In this public-facing space, to the general public, if I was to announce, I am a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have violated Tradition 11. Doesn't matter whether I'm saying Alcoholics Anonymous is good or bad or indifferent. I've announced my membership of it in a public way. So personal anonymity has to be held. Now, I'm not famous, you'd be pleased to know. And if I was to go on TV and announce I was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, most people would forget tomorrow and wonder who was that weird guy. But nonetheless, that then would mean that this doesn't apply to me, right? So why would personal anonymity be important to somebody like me who's not even famous? We live in a world in which we're all famous. So let me show you another example of what I learned to be a traditions violation the hard way. There's another way of sort of proving to you guys that I've never been particularly good at this stuff. This was something that I put on to social media whenever on the day that I was 1 year sober. Do you ever know me without a beard, Chris? No. So back then I had no beard. I had a wedding ring on. That's another thing that was different back then. But I was 1 year sober. I was going to a meeting where you get like sobriety chips. And they gave me this one that said 1 year on it. I could not believe that I hadn't had a drink for 12 months. Like, that was insane. It was a miracle. I wanted to tell everyone. I wanted to boast about it. I was just overjoyed. So I went home and I propped up my little 1 year chip. So if anybody's listening to the recording, this is bad radio. But what we're looking at is a picture of me kind of blurred out, holding the book Alcoholics Anonymous, pretending to read it because, I wanted to look good, with my 1 year chip in front of me. And then put that onto social media. And then all my friends were like, congratulating me. It was amazing. There was floodgates of people saying how much of a great lad I was, and sure, that does not feel nice. We all love that. Somebody didn't, though. And it was noticeable. It was my sponsor. Like, he wasn't liking this post, and he wasn't commenting on it, and he wasn't telling me he was a great fella. And I noticed that quite earlier on, and I could see he was active on social media, but he still didn't comment on it. And then a couple of days went by, and he still hadn't mentioned anything. So then I started to smell a rat. And by this stage, I was really heavily studying the traditions for some things that were happening in our own group. So I went and dug out my notes on Tradition 11, and it just dawned on me that that was a massive traditions violation. I then spoke to the outside world and announced my membership of Alcoholics Anonymous in a form of a picture. Now, it's not that ambiguous. I didn't say, hey, everybody, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I made it so abundantly clear that I was. So what happens then whenever, I don't know, someone goes onto that same social media a few years later and I'm sitting there hammered making a nuisance out of myself, and thankfully that wasn't to be my fate. But that kind of anonymity break was something that I fell foul of. That was a violation of Tradition 11, without a doubt. And I see some people now put things on that are slightly more ambiguous, maybe just like a number 7. And you go, why is that guy put a number 7 on? Like, we all know. And then the floodgates open of members of AA going, congratulations on your 7 years sobriety, whatever. And then, I'm not saying firmly that I believe those things to be violations, but I just avoid all of that now. I just don't go anywhere near it. I don't speak about anything that would point to my membership of Alcoholics Anonymous on social media. Isn't that mad? Like, we all have access to these massive public platforms now, which is a wonderful thing. And we're certainly able to use those platforms for AA, and methods I'll talk about in a while. But it also means that there's areas where I could fall foul of this very, very easily. Bill Wilson, I never knew him. He was dead long before my time, but he seemed like he was a bit of a showman. I'm sure he found this really, really difficult to resist. At one point, he was offered a Nobel Prize, which he declined because it would be a violation of Tradition 7 because of the public placing of his position. He was offered the front cover of Time magazine. his response to the Time magazine guys was, well, look, if you want to do an article on Alcoholics Anonymous, then you've got my full cooperation. But if you want to make it about me, then we just can't do that. It violates our 11th tradition. So does that mean that we just don't tell anyone? We go back into this kind of wrong perception of us being part of a secret society where we don't announce to the outside world who we are and what we do behind our creepy little rooms. Well, let's go to the 12 Traditions Illustrated pamphlet, the outlawed one. Let me see if I can just find the right page, bear with me. Where it reads, sorry guys, bear with me. It says, alcoholics who have recovered through our program are themselves the strongest attraction that AA has. That's us. We're the strongest attraction that AA has. When people are asked what led them to seek AA help, the answer given most often is an AA member. Their chances would have been slim if all of us had remained completely in hiding, but many of us have chosen to tell our friends, neighbours, employers, co-workers, doctors, spiritual advisors that we are in AA. And when we do so, we are not breaking our anonymity in the meaning of this tradition. This is not about telling individual members and people and talking openly about our membership of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's about doing so on a public platform. I have chosen to be completely out of the closet on my membership of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the knock-on effect of that is there's, like, before I got sober, like, pretty much everybody I associated with was mad for the drink, and a lot of whom were alcoholics, and some of whom are now members of this fellowship. They get into this fellowship through my being public about it. Would they have come in anyway? I don't know. But my job is to bear witness. My job is to bear witness of what happened to me. And, if you think back to the third step prayer, where part of the deal there would have us bear witness. It says, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Then it goes into the clauses of this deal, if you like. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Then it says, take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. To bear witness. Now, how can I possibly bear witness if I don't tell anyone that I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? It's an interesting one. I guess that there are some exceptions. I know someone whose occupation is such that if they were to reveal their membership of Alcoholics Anonymous, it would cause different problems. I can understand where there are exceptions to this point. It's most certainly not a rule. But if I'm not able to help people, then what is really the point to my being sober? I learned from working through this that I'm really building up to step 12, where I'm able to be of service and to announce that I have an answer to a very, very marginalized problem is something that's really important. So, well, what about in AA? Does that mean that we withhold our name? So, like, I thought so, because I was just going by the example of other groups and other people in other groups, because they all withheld their surname. So I thought, well, you must have to withhold your surname or you're in violation of Tradition 11. No. You'll notice that I have my full name on the screen. However, this meeting is being recorded, so I won't say my full name out loud. What's the difference between the two? While I'm here with you, other fellow members of Alcoholics Anonymous, in a closed meeting, I am sharing my identity with you. The outside world may well listen to that recording, So if they want to listen to all this stuff that means nothing to them outside of context, whatever, if that's what you want to do with your life, but you will not know who I am. You will not know my full name. You know my name's Brian. It's a very common name. That's all you'll know. You, however, I want you to be able to get hold of me because we're part of the same fellowship. So there's two levels to the anonymity break. The one we spoke about before, where you're publicly announcing your membership of Alcoholics Anonymous, and then there's another one that, well, let me refer to the way that Dr. Bob spoke about this. Dr. Bob had a real blunt way of wording things. I loved him. If he was around now, me and him would have been mates. So this is what he says. Since our tradition of anonymity designates the exact level where the line should be held, it must be obvious to anyone who can read and understand the English language that to maintain anonymity at any other level is definitely a violation of this tradition. He's a charismatic chap, isn't he? So if you can read English, you should understand it. What he goes on to say is the AA who hides his identity from his fellow AAs by using only a given name violates the tradition just as much as the AA who permits his name to appear in the press in connection with matters pertaining to AA. So the level has been set. The level has been set that if I'm talking in the press that I don't announce who I am, or if I'm in the TV or if I'm on the radio, I don't talk who I am. That's the level. Now you can go above the level or you can go below the level. Now, if I'm going below the level within Alcoholics Anonymous, I am in violation of Tradition 11. But as I communicate with the outside world, I then withdraw my surname or anything that would point to my true identity. Hope that makes sense, and I think it's a relatively straightforward one. This share the love with each other, and this make sure we're there for each other, and we are acting like people within this fellowship. All right, the other point of this tradition that it looks at is advertising, and certainly the first group that I was a member of went absolutely bananas because somebody suggested to put an advert in a local paper, and it's like, oh my God, we don't advertise. Advertising would be a violation of Tradition 11, and it's what a lot of crap. Of course we advertise. We absolutely advertise, but what it talks about here is it says that we avoid sensational advertising. Now, what does it mean by that? Well, there's someone who I know used to work within the marketing department of a well-known children's charity in the United Kingdom. And their TV adverts at the time would have things like a child's bedroom outside of which there's a menacing-looking adult. And it was implying that there's maybe something here that's sinister. It's very, very uncomfortable to watch. Or maybe seeing a child with bruises or whatever, and where you can see the child's been physically harmed, horrendous. Very, very sensational though. So that's the kind of thing we avoid. Like, we're not going to show like a drink driving scene with a guy hanging out with a bottle of whiskey in his hand or whatever. Now, that same charity has since brought in a policy of we avoid sensational advertising, and they instead talk about the positive effects of the work that they do. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous has always had that position. We advertise for sure. And at one point in All Surrender Group, there's an advert on the TV, something that I was very, very supportive of, because the type of advert was such that it gave the information of what it is that we do and how to find us. That's it. That's all we do. We just make our presence known. We make it known, like if you have an issue with alcohol, we're here to help. I guess what sort of concerns me is, and I wonder, is it as a result of the misunderstanding of this tradition, that the method of advertising that we all favor these days is advertising on the internet and through social media and so on. And, we just fall very, very short of this. A guy typed in to my phone there before the meeting started, trouble with alcohol, Belfast. And I'm scrolling and scrolling, and then I go on to the next page, and I'm scrolling and scrolling. I went through 14 pages of scrolling before I seen Alcoholics Anonymous Ireland. See if you have something that you don't want your wife to find and you want to hide it somewhere where nobody will ever see it. Stick it on the second page of a Google search. Nobody will find it there. Alcoholics Anonymous, at this present moment, is not even on the second page of a Google search. It's just so heavily, like we just don't invest in that sufficiently. We need to be there for people. Not only do we advertise, we need to get fucking better at it. You know, we can avoid sensational advertising using this medium. I'm so sick to the back teeth. I remember whenever we first went online, we then started playing around with Facebook and what we could do and different Facebook methods of reaching out, whatever, and the service structure. We're going, oh, there's them idiots again. Now they're messing around with social media. I'm sick of people telling us that we can't do things. You know, and if you want to call me up sometime for what little I know, I'm not going to say we can't do something. I'll show you my experience of how we find safe ways to use these technologies in order to do things. We want guidance on how to use the technology safely rather than to be told that we can't do it. The technology's there. These are tools that we should be exploiting and using to our advantage. This term attraction rather than promotion, I want to finish in this, Chris, because I don't know, what a feeling it's going to finish early. Maybe I've waffled on a bit more than I thought I would. You know, what does it mean by attraction rather than promotion? And again, you know, from my own experience being in various groups, you know, and folks would say you need to tone down what you're saying because you need to make it more attractive, a traditional 11, attraction rather than promotion, whatever. Like, it's not what it means. Like, we don't dull down the program of Alcoholics Anonymous because we want it to sound pretty. You know, in what way are we attractive, Chris? In what way are we attractive, David? You know, is it because like I bothered to wear a tie today? Is it because we say nice things whenever people come in? The forward to the second edition, Roman numerals 20, where it reads, while our internal difficulties of the adolescent period were being ironed out, our public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. Why? For this, there were two principal reasons. Number one, the large number of recoveries, and number two, reunited homes. If you want your group to be attractive, do the fucking work and get results. The big book groups, now this is a very, very scientific assessment based on nothing other than my observation. The big book groups that really, really invest in sticking to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that are principled tradition groups, get results. People get sober. People stay sober. They sponsor other people. Next thing you know, like as a sponsor, I remember the first time I had a phone call from someone to say, I just had a call from the court and I can now have custody of my kids again. That's what makes us attractive. What makes us attractive is that we help people and we get the job done. Do not tone down the quality of your group. Do not tone down the severity of the message because it's a harsh message because of a misunderstanding of this tradition. Anyway, Chris, that was fun. That's all I've got for now. Hopefully there's loads of questions because it's my favourite bit. But thanks everybody for coming, and see you again next week for the last session of this run.